June 4, 1943. Camp Hearn, Texas. The spoon quivered in Unifitzia Wilhelm Hoffman's hand as he stared at the astonishing meal before him. Beef stew with real chunks of meat larger than his entire weekly ration in the Afrika Korps, fresh vegetables that weren't rotting, white bread that actually contained wheat instead of sawdust, and beside it all, a glass of cold milk that seemed to shimmer in the Texas afternoon sun. "This cannot be real," he wrote in a letter that would reach his mother in bombed-out Hamburg 6 months later. "They are showing us propaganda food. Tomorrow we will get turnip water like everyone else." Around him, 1,850 German prisoners of war from RL's defeated Afrika Korps sat in stunned disbelief in the mess hall that had been constructed in just 90 days. Men who had survived on 200 grams of sawdust-filled bread and watery soup made from fodder beets now faced portions that could have fed an entire Wehrmacht squad for 3 days. The clatter of forks on metal trays had ceased. Some men were weeping, others sat frozen, unable to reconcile the abundance before them with 3 years of Nazi propaganda about starving, collapsing America. What these soldiers failed to understand was that they were witnessing the agricultural and industrial might of a nation that produced more food than it could consume, even while feeding 12 million men under arms and shipping 17 million tons of provisions to its allies. The transformation that began with this first meal would eventually dismantle every assumption they held about American weakness, German superiority, and the inevitable victory of the Third Reich. To grasp the psychological impact of American abundance, one must first appreciate the depths of deprivation from which these soldiers emerged. By 1943, the German ration system had decayed into a convoluted hierarchy of hunger. Civilians in Germany received 1,700 calories daily if they were lucky. Soldiers in the field were promised 3,600 calories, but rarely received even half that amount. In North Africa, where most of the first POWs were captured, conditions had become desperate. Feldwebel Vera Müller, captured with the 21st Panzer Division in Tunisia, kept a diary preserved by his family. His last entry before capture read, May 11, 1943, division meal today, 150 grams of black bread, mostly sawdust. 15 grams of margarine, rancid soup made from 1 potato and desert weeds. The Italians have nothing. We are eating our horses. The Afrika Korps, once the pride of the Wehrmacht, had been reduced to skeletal shadows by the time of surrender. RML himself had repeatedly complained to Berlin about the impossible supply situation. Ships carrying provisions were sunk by Allied aircraft and submarines. What little arrived was often spoiled by heat. By early 1943, German troops in North Africa were suffering from scurvy, beriberi, and protein deficiency diseases that Wehrmacht medical officers hadn't seen since World War I. Oberleutnant Friedrich Bauer, a medical officer captured at Kasserine Pass, documented the deterioration. The men's gums bled constantly from scurvy. Night blindness from vitamin A deficiency afflicted 30% of the soldiers. Edema from protein starvation caused swelling in their legs. We had become an army of walking skeletons. The surrender in Tunisia on May 13, 1943, brought 275,000 Axis troops into Allied captivity. Among them were the elite of the German military, veterans who had conquered France, driven the British back to El Alamein, and believed absolutely in German racial superiority and American decadence. The first shock came immediately at the temporary collection points in North Africa. American quartermasters distributed C rations and K rations to the prisoners. These combat rations, which American soldiers constantly complained about, seemed like miraculous food to the Germans. Unteroffizier Karl Schmidt, captured with the 95th Light Division, wrote, "The Americans gave us small boxes they called K rations. Inside was more food than I had seen in 2 months, crackers that weren't moldy, a tin of meat that was actually meat, chocolate, sugar, even cigarettes." They apologized that this was all they had. Apologized. The journey to America aboard Liberty ships provided the second revelation. These vessels, churned out from American shipyards at a rate German naval officers would have deemed impossible, were returning from delivering supplies to Europe. Instead of sailing back empty, they carried human cargo. In the holds hastily converted for personnel transport, German soldiers encountered American abundance in its most casual form. Gerrit Hans Weber remembered, "The American sailors threw away more food after each meal than my entire company had eaten in a week." Whole loaves of white bread barely touched went into the garbage. Sailors complained about having chicken too often. One crushed a chocolate bar underfoot because it had melted slightly. We fought each other to dig through their waste. Norfolk Naval Base, Virginia, August 1943. As the prisoners disembarked, they encountered a scene that shattered their understanding of wartime reality. Dock workers, many women and African Americans whom Nazi ideology had deemed incapable of skilled labor, unloaded ships while eating sandwiches packed with meat and cheese. They drank Coca-Cola and tossed the bottles into bins without a second thought. They smoked cigarettes continuously, extinguishing them half-finished. At the processing station, each prisoner received a medical examination that included something unimaginable: vitamin supplements to remedy their nutritional deficiencies. German medical officers, themselves prisoners, worked alongside American doctors who treated malnutrition cases. That resembled concentration camp victims more than enemy soldiers. Major William Patterson, a U.S. Army medical officer at Norfolk, reported, "The Germans arrived in a state of severe malnutrition. Average weight was 30 pounds below normal. Scurvy, pelgra, beriberi. Diseases of starvation we'd only read about in textbooks. We immediately put them on a graduated feeding program to prevent refeeding syndrome. The train journey to the interior camps provided a 3-day immersion in American agricultural abundance. As the trains rolled through Virginia's Shenandoah Valley, prisoners pressed against windows, watching endless orchards heavy with apples. Fields of corn stretching to the horizon, dairy farms with herds of fat cattle. Every small town had a grocery store with full windows, restaurants with signs advertising daily specials, ice cream parlors with lines of customers. The American P camp system would eventually hold 425,000 German prisoners, with 371,683 present at the peak in May 1945. These prisoners were distributed across 700 camps in 46 states. Texas alone hosted approximately 50,000 German PSWs. In multiple facilities, taking advantage of the state's climate, which the Geneva Convention specified should be similar to where prisoners were captured. Camp Hearn, Texas, one of the first camps to receive Afrika Korps prisoners, had been constructed in just 4 months and could hold 4,800 PSWs. It featured amenities that exceeded what most German soldiers had known as civilians: electric lights, hot water, flush toilets, recreation halls, and most incredibly mess halls that served 3 hot meals daily. The first full day's menu, June 5, 1943, was preserved in camp records. Breakfast: oatmeal with milk and sugar, scrambled eggs, bacon, toast with butter and jam, coffee with cream and sugar, orange juice. Lunch: vegetable soup, roast pork with gravy, mashed potatoes, carrots, bread and butter, apple pie, milk. Dinner: fried chicken, rice, green beans, cornbread, fruit salad, coffee. This single day's menu contained approximately 3,500 calories, more than German civilians received in 2 days. The meat alone exceeded the monthly meat ration for German civilians. A bar writer, Hermann Richa, a former factory worker from the RU, wrote, "I ate until I was sick. Then I ate more. We all did. Some men hid bread in their bunks, certain this bounty would end. The American guards laughed and told us there would be the same tomorrow and the day after. We didn't believe them." The abundance of food in American P camps did more to destroy Nazi ideology than any propaganda could have achieved. These soldiers had been told that America was weak, divided, on the verge of collapse. Yet here they were being fed better than Wehrmacht officers while America simultaneously fought a two-front war. The camp canteen became a window into American consumer culture. With the 80 cents daily they earned from labor, prisoners could purchase items that had vanished from Germany years ago. Chocolate bars, cigarettes, razor blades, soap, toothpaste, writing paper, and incredibly ice cream. The canteen at Kampern sold 5,000 ice cream bars weekly to German prisoners who hadn't tasted ice cream since before the war. Writer Fritz Müller wrote to his wife, "Yesterday I bought ice cream. Ice cream. In Germany even party. Officials cannot get ice cream, but here enemy prisoners buy it for 5 cents. The Americans have so much cocoa they feed it to prisoners." The therapeutic feeding program for malnourished prisoners revealed American medical abundance. Prisoners received vitamin injections, nutritional supplements, and specialized diets to address deficiency diseases. The camp hospitals had more medical supplies than most German field hospitals. Penicillin, that miracle drug that Germany couldn't produce, was used freely on prisoner infections. Dr. Heinrich Schmidt, a captured Wehrmacht medical officer, wrote, "They gave us vitamins in bottles, hundreds of pills, like candy. In Germany, we had no vitamins for our own wounded. Here, enemy prisoners received better medical care than German civilians could dream of." By October 1943, labor shortages led to POWs working on American farms and in food processing facilities. This exposure to American agricultural and industrial food production completed their ideological demolition. At a cotton gin outside Houston, prisoners witnessed mechanical harvesting that defied comprehension. A single picking machine did the work of 50 men. The gene processed more cotton in a day than German textile mills saw in a month. But it was the casual abundance that truly stunned them. Field workers, including African American laborers, whom Nazi ideology had declared subhuman, ate lunches that would have been feasts in Germany. Thick sandwiches of beef or ham, whole apples, slices of pie, thermoses of coffee with real cream. They threw away half-eaten food without thought. Unterpizia Johann Kellner, working on a farm near Jackson, Mississippi, wrote, "The Negro workers eat meat every day, white bread, fruit. One threw away a whole apple because it had a small bruise. In Germany, people would fight over that apple." At a Del Monte processing plant in California, prisoners saw trainloads of peaches turned into canned fruit technology that didn't exist in Germany. The plant processed more fruit in a single day than Germany imported in a year. Workers drank orange juice like water. Damaged fruit that would have been treasured in Germany was dumped by the ton. Nothing shocked German PS more than American meat consumption. In Germany, civilians received 250 grams of meat weekly when available. German soldiers were supposed to receive 150 grams daily, but rarely did. In American P camps, prisoners received meat 2 or 3 times daily. The quality astounded them even more than the quantity. Not horse meat, not mysterious canned substances labeled meat, but recognizable cuts of beef, pork, and chicken. Camp Shelby in Mississippi, which housed 5,300 German PS at its peak, went through 14,000 pounds of meat weekly. The butcher shop cut steaks, ground hamburger, and prepared roasts with a casualness that seemed almost obscene to men who had seen their families slowly starve. Ober writer Paul Fisher wrote, "Today for Sunday dinner, we had roast beef, a slab as thick as my thumb. The Americans complained it was tough. In Germany, this would be wedding feast meat. My children have never seen such meat." The prisoners working at Swift and Company's meat packing plant in Fort Worth witnessed the full scale of American meat production. The plant processed 5,000 cattle daily. Workers took home packages of beef that would have cost a German laborer a month's wages. The waste was magnificent, wrote Hauptmann Kurt Zimmermann. They discarded meat for having too much fat that would have been a treasure in Germany. 1. Plant produced more meat in a week than Bavaria sees in a year. German PWS had subsisted for years on preserved vegetables, sauerkraut, pickled beets, dried legumes. Fresh fruit had become a memory, available only to the party elite. In American camps, fresh produce arrived daily. The psychological impact of fresh oranges at breakfast cannot be overstated. Oranges, tropical fruit in June in Texas, available to enemy prisoners. The camps received regular shipments of apples, peaches, pears, grapes, and even bananas, fruit that most Germans hadn't seen since before the war. Untold. Wilhelm Becker wrote, "They gave us oranges at breakfast, not special occasions, every day if we wanted. The vitamin C cured my bleeding gums in a week. We ate more fruit as prisoners than German children see in a year." The vegetable varieties seemed infinite. Lettuce, tomatoes, corn, beans, peas, carrots, potatoes, onions, cabbage, squash. Fresh, not preserved. Camp Hearn had a 50-acre vegetable garden worked by prisoners who were amazed at the productivity of American soil and farming methods. Working on farms, prisoners encountered agricultural abundance that challenged their understanding of what was possible. In California's Central Valley, where some PS were transferred for agricultural work, they picked fruit in orchards that stretched for miles. They watched in horror as perfectly good fruit was discarded for minor blemishes or destroyed to maintain prices. In Germany, chocolate had disappeared by 1941, replaced by ersatz chocolate made from roasted acorns and beet sugar. Real chocolate was rarer than gold. Sugar was rationed to 200 g monthly for civilians. In American P camps, chocolate and sweets were everyday items. The Camp PX Post Exchange sold Hershey bars, Baby Ruth, Snickers, Milky Way, brand names that would become legendary among returned PWS. The psychological impact of this casual availability of luxury foods cannot be overstated. Oberth writer Kurt Vanner wrote, "I bought 5 chocolate bars with 1 day's wages. In Germany, all the money in the world cannot buy 1 real chocolate bar. What kind of wealth allows enemies to buy chocolate daily? The camp kitchens baked desserts daily. Pies, cakes, cookies, puddings. Sugar was used liberally in coffee, on cereal, in desserts. The prisoners, many suffering from years of sugar deprivation, initially made themselves sick on sweets. Milk, butter, cheese, cream, dairy products that had virtually disappeared from German diets appeared in abundance in American P camps. Fresh milk at every meal. Butter for bread, cheese sandwiches, ice cream. The calcium and protein from dairy products rapidly improved the prisoners' health. In Germany, milk was reserved for small children and pregnant women when available. Butter was a black market commodity. Cheese was a distant memory. At Camp Hearn, the dairy delivered 500 gallons of milk daily. Prisoners who hadn't tasted fresh milk in years drank it like medicine. Untizier France Bear wrote, "I drank a full glass of cold milk today. Real milk, not powdered, not condensed. It tasted like peace, like childhood, like everything we had lost." German coffee by 1943 was made from roasted barley, acorns, or kori, bitter substitutes that bore no resemblance to real coffee. In American P camps, real coffee flowed like water. The psychological impact of unlimited coffee cannot be understated for a culture that had prized coffee as central to social life. The smell of brewing coffee in the morning, the casual refills at every meal, the ability to drink coffee with real cream and sugar. These small luxuries delivered devastating blows to Nazi propaganda. Hedman Friedrich Timman wrote, "The Americans drink coffee all day long. Real coffee from Brazil with cream and sugar. In Germany, my mother stretches 50 grams of Oz." Fundamental staple of German diet became another lesson in American abundance. German bread by 1943 was a dark, heavy mixture of rye, potato flour, and Sawdust ration to 2,000 g weekly for manual laborers. It often arrived moldy. In American P camps, fresh white bread appeared at every meal. The camp bakery at Camp Shelby produced 10,000 loaves weekly. Soft white wheat bread that Germans associated with luxury. Prisoners could eat as much as they wanted. Greiter Paul Schmidt wrote, "White bread soft as cake, fresh every day. We can take as many slices as we want." In Germany, people are killed for stealing bread. As prisoners were allowed to write home, their letters became vehicles of devastating truth that German censors struggled to suppress. How could they explain to families surviving on turnip soup that they, as prisoners, were eating meat 3 times a day? Many prisoners initially lied in their letters, unable to burden their starving families with the truth. Others sent their entire earnings home to buy food on the black market, knowing that their monthly wages could purchase what their families couldn't obtain with ration cards. Untypische Karl Hoffmann's letter to his wife intercepted by German censors read, "My beloved Greta, I am well fed here. Do not worry about me. The Americans have more food than they know what to do with. I understand now why they fight. They are protecting paradise." What stunned German PS even more than abundance was American flexibility in accommodating dietary needs. Prisoners with medical conditions received special diets. Diabetics got sugar-free meals. Those with ulcers received bland diets. This individualized care for enemy prisoners exceeded what German hospitals could provide for their own wounded. The Americans even attempted to provide culturally familiar foods. They procured reflour for dark bread, sauerkraut, and other German preferences. This respect for individual dietary needs contradicted everything about Nazi collectivism. Dr. Wilhelm Braun, Sr., German medical officer at Camp Shelby, wrote, "The Americans spend more effort accommodating the dietary needs of enemy prisoners than the Wehrmacht spends feeding its own soldiers." As more prisoners worked on American farms, they received an education in agricultural productivity that would reshape post-war Germany. They learned about crop rotation, chemical fertilizers, mechanized farming, and irrigation. They saw yields that German agriculture couldn't achieve even in peacetime. Working on a wheat farm in Kansas, Oberg writer Hermann Baer discovered that a single American farmer with machinery could farm 640 acres. Land that would require an entire German village to work. The combine harvester could process 100 acres of wheat daily. The American farmer I worked for produced more food than my entire district in Bavaria. Weber wrote, "He did it with machines, chemicals, and scientific methods we had never seen." November 25, 1943 brought another psychological shock: Thanksgiving dinner. The prisoners had no context for this American holiday, but they understood abundance when they saw it. The meal served at Camp Hearn that day: roast turkey with stuffing, mashed potatoes with gravy, sweet potatoes with marshmallows, green bean casserole, cranberry sauce, rolls with butter, pumpkin pie, apple pie, coffee, and milk. Each prisoner received portions that would have fed a German family for a week. The turkey alone exceeded monthly German meat rations. Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann wrote, "The Americans celebrated a holiday by feeding enemy prisoners like nobility." If every American family was eating the same meal, America is not a country but a paradise. Prisoners working in American canning factories witnessed food preservation on an industrial scale that Germany couldn't match. At the Campbell Soup Factory in Camden, New Jersey, they watched the plant produce 10 million cans of soup annually. The assembly lines ran continuously, filling cans with meat and vegetables that German factories couldn't obtain. The technology astounded them. Automated peeling machines, continuous cookers, vacuum sealers. But more shocking was the quality control. Cans with slight dents were rejected. The waste stream from imperfect products exceeded Germany's total food production. Under Officer Fritz Muller wrote, they rejected whole pallets of canned goods for having labels printed slightly off. Center. Perfect food discarded for cosmetic flaws. Ice cream emerged as the ultimate symbol of American excess. In Germany, ice cream had been a rare pre-war luxury, impossible during wartime. In American P. camps, ice cream was routine. Camp Shelby had an ice cream machine that produced 50 gallons daily during summer. Prisoners could buy ice cream bars, cones, and cups at the canteen. The idea that enemies were fed ice cream while German children had never tasted it proved emotionally devastating. Uber writer Hans Meer wrote, I ate chocolate ice cream today. In Germany, this would be unimaginable even for the wealthy. Here, prisoners of war buy it. 4 pocket change. The transformation in prisoners' health through proper nutrition was documented meticulously by American medical officers. Within 3 months of arrival, the average prisoner gained 25 to 30 pounds, scurvy disappeared. Night blindness resolved. Protein edema subsided. Major Robert Harrison, chief medical officer at Camp Shelby, reported, the Germans arrived resembling concentration camp victims, emaciated, diseased, mentally affected by starvation. 3 months of proper nutrition transformed them into healthy young men. The prisoners themselves could hardly believe their physical transformation. Muscles returned, energy increased. Mental fog from malnutrition lifted. They looked in mirrors and saw themselves as they had been before the war. As their health improved and their bellies filled, many prisoners experienced crushing guilt about their families' suffering. How could they enjoy 3 meals a day while their children starved? The truth that American enemies fed them better than Germany fed its own people was too painful to share. Unto Aphasia Paul Fisher's unsent letter found after the war read, My dear wife, I cannot tell you the truth. I eat meat every day while you starve. I am safe while you are bombed. The Americans treat me better than our own government treats you. Christmas 1943 delivered another psychological blow. American church groups, civic organizations, and the Red Cross sent 500,000 Christmas packages to German PSWs. Each contained chocolates, cookies, canned goods, cigarettes, and toiletries. Local communities added homemade goods. Knitted scarves, hand-drawn cards, cookies baked by church ladies. The packages were distributed without regard to rank or political affiliation. This egalitarian generosity from enemies whose families were fighting and dying in Europe shattered the last remnants of Nazi racial theory. Hedman Vera Klein wrote, American civilians whose sons we were trying to kill months ago sent us Christmas gifts. Churches prayed for us. Children sent cards wishing us Merry Christmas. Only those absolutely certain of victory show such charity to enemies. By early 1944, the food in American P camps had become an inadvertent education system. Prisoners learned about nutrition, vitamins, balanced diets, and food safety. They discovered that adequate nutrition improved not just health, but productivity, mood, and mental clarity. The camp libraries stocked American agricultural journals and cookbooks. Prisoners studied American farming methods, food processing, and nutritional science. They learned that American agricultural abundance wasn't accidental but the result of scientific farming mechanization and efficient distribution. Oberritter Friedrich Becker, a former agricultural student, wrote, the Americans have turned farming into science. They test soil, breed better crops, use chemistry to increase yields. No wonder they have so much food. As 1944 progressed in news from Germany, worsened, the contrast between pea abundance and German starvation became unbearable. Letters that slipped past censors told of cities reduced to rubble, civilians eating grass soup, children dying of malnutrition. Meanwhile, German prisoners of war in America complained about repetitive menus. The moral foundation of Nazism crumbled in the face of American abundance. How could the master race be starving while their inferior enemies wasted food? The Negro who emptied their garbage ate better than German officers. The ideology was dead, killed by reality. The summer of 1944 brought fresh revelations as prisoners worked in America's peak agricultural season. They picked peaches in Georgia, harvested vegetables in New Jersey, and worked in the wheat fields of Kansas. The sheer volume of food production overwhelmed them. In a single day at a Georgia peach orchard, prisoners picked fruit that would have supplied a German city for a month. Perfect peaches were sorted by size and quality. Slightly imperfect fruit went to canneries. Damaged fruit was discarded or fed to pigs. Gerrit Wilhelm Hoffmann wrote, "We fed peaches to pigs today. Thousands of peaches too ripe for shipping given to swine." In Germany, people would weep for such fruit. An incident at Camp Shelby in July 1944 captured the psychological impact of American abundance. Local farmers donated truckloads of watermelons for a 4th of July celebration. The German PSWs had never seen watermelons. This exotic fruit didn't exist in Germany. The prisoners were given whole watermelons to share. Many didn't know how to eat them. Some prisoners wept at the sweetness, the abundance of pure sugar and water in fruit form. Untold Carl Schmidt wrote, "They gave us giant green fruits full of sweet red flesh. Each one could feed a family." The Americans ate the centers and threw away the rest. A nation that can waste food as entertainment has already won. Working in Iowa cornfields provided another agricultural shock. Iowa alone produced more corn than all of Germany produced of all grains combined. But most shocking, the majority went to feeding animals, not humans. The concept of growing food to feed to animals to produce meat was a luxury Germany couldn't afford. In America, prime crop land was dedicated to producing animal feed, demonstrating a level of agricultural abundance that seemed impossible. Feldwebel Hermann Fischer wrote, "The farmer explained that corn was mainly for pigs and cattle. They grow food to feed to animals to make meat. The Americans have so much grain. They can afford to convert it to meat." At a sugar beet processing plant in Colorado, German PWS witnessed sugar production that defied belief. Germany had severe sugar shortages with civilians receiving 200 grams monthly. The Colorado plant processed 5,000 tons of sugar beets daily, producing mountains of white sugar. Workers at the plant received 5 bags of sugar as partial payment. They used sugar liberally in coffee, on cereal, in baking. The casual consumption of pure sugar by ordinary workers provided another devastating comparison. Oberreiter Paul Bear wrote, "I watched a worker pour half a cup of sugar into his coffee. This was 2 months of German sugar rations dissolved into 1 cup of coffee." German PWS working at Gulf Coast ports witnessed American fishing fleets bringing in catches that dwarfed German fishing industry output. Shrimp boats dumped tons of bycatch, perfectly edible fish thrown away because they weren't the target species. At Galveston, prisoners watched shrimpers throw away more fish in a day than German fishing fleets caught in a week. The concept of discarding food because it wasn't the preferred type was incomprehensible. Gerrit Hans Muller wrote, "They threw tons of fish back into the sea because they were the wrong kind." In Germany, people would fight over fish heads. At Wisconsin dairy farms, German PSWs encountered milk production that seemed impossible. Single farms produced more milk daily than entire German districts. The technology, mechanical milkers. Refrigerated tanks, pasteurization equipment was decades ahead of German farming. Most shocking was the casual waste. Milk that wasn't perfectly fresh was dumped. Cream was separated and used liberally. Butter was churned in quantities that would have supplied German cities. Untold Fritz Vanner wrote, "The farm where I work produces 1,000 gallons of milk daily. One farm. They pour excess milk on fields as fertilizer." At an egg farm in Maryland, prisoners encountered industrial egg production unknown in Germany. The farm housed 50,000 chickens, producing 40,000 eggs daily. Automated systems collected, washed, and sorted eggs. Germans received 1 egg per week on ration cards when available. American prisoners of war received eggs daily at breakfast. The Maryland farm shipped train loads of eggs to cities. Gerreiter Wilhelm Becker wrote, "Each house held more birds than our entire village. They threw away more cracked eggs daily than Germany produces." Thanksgiving 1944 proved even more abundant than the previous year, despite America fighting on 2 fronts. The meals served to German PS hadn't diminished but grown. Turkey, ham, roast beef, mashed potatoes, sweet potatoes, stuffing, gravy, green beans, corn, cranberry sauce, 3 types of pie, ice cream, coffee, milk, and wine. The prisoners sat in stunned silence. Their homeland was starving, cities destroyed, children eating grass soup. Yet America fed German prisoners a feast that exceeded pre-war German celebrations. Hedman Vera Mueller wrote, "The Americans have so much food that they can feed enemies better than we fed ourselves in peacetime. They conquered us with food before their armies arrived." By late 1944, many prisoners stopped writing home about food. The guilt was unbearable. Hidden diaries and unsent letters found after the war revealed the psychological torture of abundance amid family starvation. Feldable Otto Schmidt's unsent letter read, "I dreamed I could send you a single American meal. The meat from my lunch could feed you for a week. I am in paradise while you are in hell." As 1945 began, and reports of German collapse reached the camps, the contrast became surreal. Prisoners learned of the Ardennes offensive failure while eating New Year's dinner. They heard about German cities without food, heat, or water while sitting in heated mess halls. The American newspapers showed pictures of starving German civilians, children with rickets and starvation bellies. The prisoners recognized their own families in these images. Ober writer Hans Fischer wrote, "The newspaper shows German children eating soup made from grass. I had bacon for breakfast. My little Klaus is eating grass while I eat meat." When Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945, German PS in American camps faced a terrible irony. The war's end meant they would eventually return to a destroyed, starving nation. Many didn't want to leave. The camps had become refugees from the starvation awaiting them at home. The U.S. military began programs to train PSWs in food production and preservation, techniques they could use to help rebuild Germany. Prisoners learned about canning, farming methods, nutrition, and food distribution. Major General Louis Lurch, overseeing P operations, stated, "These men have seen American abundance. They know it's possible. They'll return to Germany with knowledge that can help prevent starvation." As repatriation approached in late 1945 and early 1946, German PSWs faced a cruel irony. They had to prepare to leave abundance for starvation. The camp commanders instituted programs to gradually reduce rations to help prisoners readjust to scarcity. Prisoners were taught to forage, to make soup from minimal ingredients, to preserve food without refrigeration. The same camps that had demonstrated abundance now taught survival in scarcity. Dr. Wilhelm Hoffmann, the senior German medical officer, wrote, "We must teach our men to starve again. Their stomachs have expanded, returning to German rations may kill some of them." Before repatriation, each camp held farewell dinners. The Americans provided final feasts that exceeded even holiday meals. At Camp Shelby's farewell dinner in February 1946, the menu included shrimp cocktail, prime rib, lobster tail, baked potato with butter and sour cream, asparagus, Caesar salad, chocolate cake, ice cream, wine, and coffee. Men wept openly, not from joy, but from the terrible knowledge that they might never eat like this again. Headman Friedrich Müller wrote, "Our last American meal was finer than any German feast I remember. Tomorrow we return to turnip soup and sawdust bread. America sent us home with full bellies and broken hearts." The journey home revealed the full scope of Germany's destruction. As trains crossed into Germany, the set against windows, watching a moonscape of ruins. Civilians at stations were skeletal, begging for food the returning prisoners didn't have. At Frankfurt Station, returning POWs watched German civilians fighting over garbage from Allied military trains. Children with swollen starvation bellies begged for chocolate that didn't exist. Unofficial Paul Bear wrote, "We returned to hell. My wife thought I was an imposter. I was too healthy, too well fed. My son, born while I was gone, has rickets from malnutrition. The shame is unbearable." Despite the trauma of return, former POWs became crucial to German recovery. They brought knowledge of American agricultural methods, food preservation, and nutrition. They understood that abundance was possible because they had lived it. Many former POWs became leaders in German agricultural reform. They introduced mechanization, chemical fertilizers, and scientific farming methods learned in America. They knew Reconstruction was possible because they had seen a society that had achieved it. Hans Müller, former Arbeiter, became an agricultural advisor in Bavaria. He wrote, "We learned in American fields what German schools never taught, that science and democracy create abundance." When the Marshall Plan was announced in 1947, former POWs understood its significance better than most Germans. They had experienced American generosity and abundance. They knew America could afford to rebuild Europe because they had seen the casual waste that demonstrated unlimited resources. The food aid that began flowing to Germany seemed familiar to former POWs. The same abundance they had experienced in captivity now extended to the entire nation. Wilhelm Schmidt, former Feldwebel, wrote, "The Americans feed us again, this time as free men. They send wheat, milk powder, canned goods, the same food we ate as prisoners." Studies conducted in the 1950s found that former POWs who had been in American camps showed significantly different attitudes than those captured by other powers. They were more likely to support democracy, believe in economic cooperation, and maintain positive views of America. The food experience had been transformative. These men had tasted abundance and wanted it for Germany. They had seen that prosperity came not from conquest, but from production, not from racial superiority, but from agricultural science. Dr. Hans Richter, studying former PSWs in 1955, concluded the American camps were inadvertent schools of democracy. Through full stomachs, prisoners learned what their ideology had hidden, that democracy and capitalism could create abundance that fascism only promised. In the 1960s and 1970s, as former POWs aged, many recorded their experiences. Their testimonies consistently emphasized food as the most psychologically impactful aspect of captivity. Vera Hoffman, former headman, testified, "The Americans defeated us with food before their armies arrived. Every meal was a lesson in their power. We surrendered to abundance long before we surrendered to Eisenhower." Kurt Muller, former UN Raffitzia, wrote, "I learned more about America from its food than from its books. The casual waste taught me about surplus. The variety taught me about choice." In the 1980s, former German PS began returning to America for reunions. They visited the camps where they had been held, now converted to other uses. They met with former guards and local civilians who remembered them. At a 1985 reunion at Camp Shelby, former Hans Baer brought German beer to share with American veterans. He toasted, "You fed us when we were enemies. You showed us abundance when we knew only scarcity. We returned to Germany with full bellies and new dreams." American Guard veteran Robert Johnson responded, "We just fed you what we ate ourselves. Nothing special. That's what America is. Nothing special that seems miraculous to those who've known want." The numbers tell the story of American agricultural might versus German scarcity. German civilian rations 1943 to 1945. Bread 2000 g weekly. Meat 250 g weekly. When available. Fats 100 g weekly. Sugar 200 g monthly. Milk, none for adults. Eggs, 1 weekly if available. Daily. Calories 1,200 to 1,700. German PW rations in American camps. Bread unlimited. Meat 350 g daily. Fats. Butter daily. Sugar unlimited in coffee desserts. Milk 1 quart daily. Eggs. Daily at breakfast. Daily calories 3,500 to 4,000. The contrast was not just quantitative but qualitative. German rations consisted of ersatz substitutes, spoiled supplies, and sawdust fillers. American rations were fresh, varied, and of higher quality than German pre-war standards. Post-war psychological studies found that German POWs in American camps experienced cognitive reconstruction through consumption. The daily experience of abundance forced them to revise fundamental beliefs about American society, German superiority, and the nature of national strength. Dr. The Friedrich Brown's 1950 study concluded the PS underwent involuntary ideological conversion through ingestion. Every meal contradicted Nazi propaganda. The men were not brainwashed, but bellywashed, converted through consumption rather than coercion. The transformation was particularly profound because it was experiential rather than theoretical. The PS didn't read about American abundance. They ate it. They didn't hear about agricultural might. They harvested it. Former PWs introduced American food culture to post-war Germany. They brought recipes learned from mesh halls, cooking techniques from farm wives, and most importantly, the expectation that abundance was achievable. The first German supermarkets in the 1950s were modeled on American stores described by former PWs. The concept of food choice, of aisles stocked with variety, of refrigerated sections and frozen foods, all were imports from American captivity experience. Even American fast food's eventual success in Germany was partly prepared by former PWs who remembered hamburgers, hot dogs, and ice cream from captivity. They had tasted casual abundance and wanted it for Germany. At the last major reunion of German PS in 1995, the 50th anniversary of war's end, 89-year-old Otto Müller delivered the keynote address. "We came to America as warriors of the master race, convinced of our superiority, certain of victory. We left as chastened men who had eaten from democracy's table. The Americans fed us not from cruelty, showing us what we couldn't have, but from generosity, sharing what they had in abundance. Every meal was a lesson. Every full belly was an education. We learned that America's strength lay not in its armies, but in its agriculture. Not in its weapons, but in its wheat. Not in its ideology, but in its ice cream. Yes, ice cream. That impossible luxury that American prisoners ate daily while German children starved. We returned to Germany with knowledge more valuable than military secrets. We knew abundance was possible because we had consumed it. We knew democracy worked because we had digested its fruits. We knew peace was preferable to war because we had tasted both. To the Americans who fed us, you conquered us with kindness. You defeated us with donuts. You converted us with coffee and cream. We who arrived as your enemies left as ambassadors of your abundance. The food you shared when we were prisoners became the foundation of our friendship as allies. Thank you for feeding us when we were hungry, for showing us mercy when we deserved judgment, for teaching us that strength lies not in taking but in giving. We ate democracy and it transformed us. The audience, American veterans, German veterans, their families, stood in ovation, united by the memory of when enemies became friends over food, when hatred dissolved in hospitality, when war ended not with vengeance, but with vitamins. The story of German PS and American food. Abundance stands as one of history's most remarkable examples of unintentional psychological warfare. Without planning or propaganda, America conquered its enemies through the simple act of feeding them well. The 425,000 German PS who passed through American camps with 371,683 present at peak experienced a collective transformation through consumption. They arrived as Nazi warriors and left as witnesses to democratic abundance. They came believing in German superiority and departed knowing American prosperity. They entered as enemies and exited as future allies. The food provided in American P camps did more than sustain life. It reshaped perceptions. Every generous serving undermined Nazi doctrine. Every dessert dismantled propaganda. Every glass of milk disproved the myth of American weakness. The prisoners were defeated not by scarcity but by plenty, not by brutality but by compassion. In the end, America's most potent weapon was not the atomic bomb, but the apple pie. Not the Sherman tank, but the chocolate bar. Not the B-17 bomber, but the beefsteak. The German POWs were overcome by nourishment, conquered by confectionery, subjugated by vegetables. They had anticipated encountering a feeble, fractured nation on the brink of collapse. Instead, they found an agricultural giant capable of feeding its foes better than Germany could feed its own citizens. They observed the arsenal of democracy, but more importantly, they experienced the abundance of democracy. The transformation was total and lasting. These men returned to Germany not as vanquished enemies, but as advocates of prosperity, champions of abundance, emissaries of the possible. They had glimpsed the future, and it was delicious. Their story illustrates that sometimes the greatest victories are won not on battlefields but in mess halls, not through devastation but through generosity, not by breaking bodies but by filling stomachs. The German POWs, astonished to find themselves eating meat, fruit, and chocolate in American camps, discovered that democracy's greatest strength lay not in its power to destroy, but in its ability to provide. Not its capacity to punish, but its capacity to nourish. They arrived famished and departed sated, not just with food, but with new visions for what their country could achieve. Within their transformation lay the foundations of the Atlantic Alliance, the Marshall Plan, and the peaceful, prosperous Germany that would rise from the ruins. The men who had once marched for the Third Reich returned home as champions of agriculture, messengers of prosperity, and witnesses to the power of a society that could turn foes into allies through the simple yet revolutionary act of sharing its abundance. They had tasted America, and they would never be the same.